I come back to you now, at the turn of the tide. Yeah, so it's been a while since I made a video, but once in a while something comes along, and I feel like I gotta say something about it, because people can't seem to think independently, and they also seem to have memories of goldfish that last for, in the case of the PC gaming community, anywhere between 12 and 18 months. So, for those of you who have forgotten what has happened over the course of the last 8, 9 years, I'm here to remind you. Hypothesis: the GTX 380 isn't all that great. Allow me to tell you why. Now, the first thing I should say is that the GTX 380 is an excellent graphics card. No one is denying that. However, I don't think it is quite as excellent as people are making it out to be. Now, I'm excluding the people who typically watch my videos who are very budget conscious, but I am more so referring to the general masses that are treating this like the second coming of Christ with a black heatsink strapped to it. And a fan that sucks from the other direction. Woo! Allow me to present Exhibit A. What you see before you is a chart. On the left side, you'll see graphics cards. And in the column immediately to the right of that column, you'll see graphics cards that were replaced by the graphics cards on the left. So, for example, you have the 580 that was replaced by the 680 at launch. The third column represents the gain in performance from one card over the other at the highest available testing resolution at the time, according to TechPowerUp. This was done, of course, to eliminate any CPU involvement of the day and stress the GPU and measure its performance with as little impedance as possible. And, of course, the last column is the price that you would have had to pay for that upgrade in today's dollars. You may also notice that I color-coded these motherfuckers, and that is because the green ones represent actual code name architectural upgrades, generation over generation. For example, Kepler from Fermi, or Maxwell from Kepler. And the cards in yellow are mid-generational release bumps, whether it be a refresh in the case of Kepler 2.0 and the 700 series, or just the release of a larger scaled up version of the same architecture as in the case of the 980 Ti. Now, if you were a keen observer, which I know you am because you watching this channel, you would have noticed that every single flagship release was roughly more or less better than the card that it replaced by about the same amount, with the exception of one really odd case being Maxwell. Maxwell was a really well-received release at the time, but it doesn't actually stack up all that well compared to the card it was replacing. But that aside, you know, they're between 20% and maybe upwards of 39 at the absolute highest end. Now, before you levy any criticism against me and I have to hunt you down and murder you, there are some valid reasons why I left a couple of cards out of this chart. The 2080, despite the fact that it came out very technically before the 2080 Ti, doesn't really belong in this chart because it was only a time span of a week. In fact, now that I think about it, the 2080 Ti really doesn't belong in this chart either, because it was the first of its kind, being that it was a gaming graphics card. It had the GeForce branding, and despite the fact that it had all of its Titan class features ripped away, it was Titan priced. So I just don't think it really fits here. For that same reason, I left the 3090 out, which is just an absurd graphics card altogether. If you want for your own headcanon to like include those up here in your head chart, by all means do so. The issue is that that's gonna just like fucking skew the price to performance ratio way out of whack and actually lend towards proving the thesis of this video even harder. Because the primary principle, another P-word point that I'm trying to make here, is that the 3080 is not anything special. Every 18 to 24 months, this is precisely what happens. Every time NVIDIA has a big online press thing, sometimes when there's not a pandemic, which I can barely remember at this point, they have people in the audience, and they tell you all about their fancy new graphics card that performs roughly 20 to 30% better than the card it's replacing. But in this context, what does 20 to 30% even mean? Well, I've already explained that it means frames per second at the highest resolution of testing that was available at the time. But what's not explained in those numbers is what a frame per second means. what sort of value proposition does a frame offer the end user? And that's what I want to explore a little bit now. How valuable is one frame? Is it fair to say that all frames are created equal? I think not. Let me illustrate my point by asking you one simple question. Which of the following is more important to you as a gaming consumer? Going from 15 frames per second to 30, or going from 30 to 60? 60 frames per second is great, and it's certainly better than 30. We've clearly established that. But going from 15 to 30 is the difference between going from grossly unplayable and a frustrating expense of your 80 or 90 hard-earned dollars on that AAA game you've been waiting to play, to playable. 30 frames per second is not ideal, but as so long as it's stable, it works. So despite the fact that we've only gone from 15 to 30, which is a 15 frame per second jump, that gain is more valuable than the next 30 frames per second that you gain. Similarly, if I were to ask you what your preference would be between 30 and 60 frames per second and 60 and 120, your answer would probably be more or less the same. Yes, 120 is great. We all love high refresh rates, but that going from 30 to 60 is far more essential to the enjoyment of our experience. And this is what is known as the law of diminishing returns. And the law of diminishing returns in this context also applies to resolutions. I'm not saying that 4K and 8K aren't great. I'm sure they're fine. But for someone who doesn't have perfect vision like me, and I don't play with glasses, I gotta be honest with you guys, in order for me to see the screen door effect and to tell that there are actually pixels on my screen, I gotta get really fucking close, no matter what resolution I'm at. I personally went from 24 inches at 1080p to 32 inches at 1440p, which is the same pixel density, which is a whole other thing together. It's not just resolution, and it's not just pixel density, it's also your viewing distance and a whole bunch of other factors. So what I'm trying to say is the quality of your experience can't really be measured in just numbers and charts and percentages alone. So the question remains, is the 3080 a good improvement? So I guess how you feel about that assessment really requires and demands some context. Are you gaming at 1080p? Are you competitive? Does every frame per second matter? Then maybe the 3080 is a worthwhile upgrade for you. Do you have a brand new 4K monitor? Do you struggle to run some games at 60 frames per second? Maybe the 3080 is a good investment for you. I think the biggest thing that people overlook when considering a new graphics card purchase is what they're actually gonna fucking do with the thing at the time. I plan on buying a new graphics card and upgrading from my 1080 probably when The Elder Scrolls 6 comes out. I think that's the only game on the horizon where I'm just like, oh yeah, everything else that's been released in the last 5 years hasn't really tickled my fancy outside of indie games and MOBAs or, you know, ARPGs, basically lo-fi games that will run on a fucking potato. Honestly, like, AAA titles are fucking boring. And even the ones that aren't boring don't demand very much of your time. So effectively, you know, you're buying an $800 fucking graphics card for what? 60 hours of enjoyment? It's not a really good value proposition, considering the thousands of hours you might put in playing City Skylines or Civ 6 or Battle for Westnoth or Tibia or Torchlight 2 or it's just any other fucking game. Slay the Spire that requires absolutely no fucking horsepower from your system and provides you countless more hours of entertainment. And I guess what's really concerning about it is how, you remember the GTX 980 I put up on the chart there and how it was only like 8 to 9% better than the 780 Ti that it was replacing? Well, back then that was kind of okay because we knew that the GTX 980 was a middle-sized die. It was in the 300 to 400 square millimeter range, just like the 1080 was on release, and Nvidia was saving the big fatso for later. I know that's not really great from a consumer perspective, but the fact that Nvidia for 2 generations now has had to lead with a fat die that's gigantic in size and power hungry is concerning because it means that their ceiling on a given architecture has already been hit. So we know with relative certainty that for the next 18 to 24 months, the 3080 or 3090, if you're insane, is pretty much all we're gonna have. So if you are one of those people that's, you know, on 4K or will buy a first generation 8K monitor and you want that premium gaming experience, you still might not have something that's good enough to drive it in the short term. And for the other 96% of us who are still playing at 1080p or less, none of this means anything. There's a reason we didn't buy the 20 series, and that's because Pascal is good enough for what we're using it for. And more importantly, touching back on the die size again, which indirectly but usually proportionately translates into more power, which translates into more heat output. Some of us who have a fucking 7x10 office don't want a 400 fucking watt graphics card in our system because I'm gonna be sitting here and my fat ass is gonna be sweating so much I'm gonna stick to my chair. What was really impressive about Pascal for me, and to a lesser extent Maxwell, was how much performance they were able to get out of something that was so tiny and power efficient. I think what I'm really actually looking forward to is the 16 series replacement. I think that's where my eyes are focused. I want to see if they can give me a stripped down 300 square millimeter die that's just for rasterization, that does what Pascal did when it was released by comparison, and more importantly does it for less power and quieter. So in closing, I think all I'm really trying to say is don't concern yourself with the shortage of these graphics cards, because if you are honest with yourself, you are probably not one of the people that this is going to be of any use for. The overwhelming majority of us have computers that run the games that we want to play just fine 99% of the time. And if you are in the 1% and you are encountering a situation where you have a game that is not running satisfactorily, by all means, consider an upgrade. And if you are one of those people, the 3080 or probably the 3070 make a lot of sense. And we'll see if that's the case when the 3070 launches mid-month. Anyhow, for my regular viewers, the plan going forward is going to be probably a video every 2 weeks. I got to get back to making these. I miss doing it. I miss the adulation. I miss the dick pics. I miss everything that you guys used to throw at me. So I guess I'm kind of back. Just probably not at the same every week frequency I was when I was a younger lad. See you again soon.